I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the classic Big Bertha model rocket from Estes. Now this is a relatively large model, it's about 2 feet long, but even though it is a large size model, this is relatively easy to build, and is not unheard of for beginners to start with this rocket. So as we do with all these rockets, we'll go ahead and open this up. And make sure that we've got all the parts. Okay, find your instruction sheet here, and that'll have a parts list on the front. Now keep in mind that some things may be inside the body tube, like the motor mount tube here. Okay, so that's the first two things on our list. That's our motor mount tube and our body tube there. And then we've got a sub package here, and inside that we've got our fin material. Okay, so we've got laser cut fins there on nice heavy duty, it looks like 3/16 inch balsa. We have water slide decals. Alright, and then we've got all the little parts in here. So these are our centering rings for the motor mount. That's the engine block. That's a sleeve that holds the engine clip. And then in yet another package, this has got the parachute. We have an 1/8 inch but long launch lug there. And then an elastic shock cord. So we'll come back to our list. Oh, and the nose cone rolled up there. Alright, it looks like we have everything. So I'm going to put this away here, and we will start in on the first step, which is the motor mount. To start, we're going to make some measurements and some markings here. So this is up on the upper left on the instructions. Okay, we are going to make a mark starting at one end. So I'm going to mark inside my tube here on the aft end. That will be the rear end of the motor mount tube, so that I don't get my markings turned around. Okay, and you can use either English or metric on this. I am metrically inclined, so I'm going to go with that. So starting from the half end, we're going to make a mark at 13 millimeters. There. And you want to elongate a little bit because the launch clip is going to tend to cover these. And then we're going to go up to 3.2 centimeters or 32 millimeters here. And then another one at 6.4 millimeters. Right there. Okay. Now, for those of you who are not metrically inclined, it gives the English equivalents right here. All right. Wake up, America. Metric system is how to go. Okay. At that last one here, so this is our 6.4 centimeter or 2.5 inch marking. We're going to make a slit here. And this is actually some fairly heavy cardboard. Okay, and then the upper part of our engine clip is going to pop right into here. Okay, and this is what I meant by extending the lines lower down, because the clip does cover up part of that. Okay, we're going to take this sleeve, and it's going to go over everything here. So I'm just going to dry fit this on. When this is installed, though, the sleeve goes down to our first mark there. Okay, and this is just to keep the clip in place so that when we pry it open here to get the engine in and out, that it doesn't just slide all over the place. Okay, our engine block will go in the top here. And if you had a little bit of crushing like I did when you made your slit there, this will bring it back out. Okay, and then we're also going to need to cut out the centering rings here, and they're mostly laser cut. You just need to go through and cut through the little tabs that are left there. You can just push them out, but those rough tabs can sometimes make it more difficult to fit inside when we're trying to do this. So if you got clean cuts there, the tubes usually fit better. Not always, but usually. Okay, so this one will be the forward ring, and it's going to fit on right here and basically right to the edge of the clip like that. And then the other one, we need to cut it out as well. Alright, and then this ring is going to go on the aft end, and it will go up to our mark there that we had from the aft end. And this is the one that's got the notch in it, because that notch is what allows the clip to travel enough to allow the motor to be replaced easily. Alright, so that should go all together, and once you've dry fitted this, then go ahead and you can just kind of move things up out of the way and use some white glue or wood glue. In my case, I have white wood glue, and we're just going to start gluing these in place. So I'm going to run a bead of glue here for that sleeve, and for this, if you get it on the metal of the engine clip, it's not a big deal. You don't want to get it down here. Alright, I'm just going to slide that back on. And this is mainly just to keep that sleeve in place. The sleeve is not going to be pressure bearing the way the centering rings will be. If you've got excess glue here, we can just go ahead and kind of fill it around both sides there. That'll be far more strength than that little sleeve actually needs. And then for our centering rings, I'm going to take the engine block out here so I don't forget about it. Okay, so for our centering rings, I'm just going to move them a little bit out of place. Put a bead of glue on there. Push it back. Okay, and then once again, we can go ahead and just form a fillet here with your finger. Smooth that in, and the excess can go up here. Okay, now we need to be a little bit more careful with the aft ring, because we don't want excess glue getting all over that clip. So I'm going to be a little bit more circumspect about where I put it. And here I'm going to go ahead and kind of fill it in first. Okay, and then I'm going to reapply the fillet here after I move the ring into place again. Okay, and then we can go ahead and add a fillet on the very aft side here. The same way we want to avoid, almost got it there, avoid the clip. Just bring that around. Okay, so make sure that's still free. And now we're going to in my case, I'm going to take a little bit of glue still on my finger. Now in the instructions here, they show putting the glue inside the tube and then putting on the ring. This is one of the few cases I don't like to do that, because if you get too much glue down in there and then you push that ring in, it's going to force glue down into the motor mount where we don't want it. So here I'm going to add the glue to the ring and then put the ring in the top here. Alright, and it should come to rest on that end of the engine clip. And then you want this to be level, so it's going to tend to want to push down more on the side opposite the clip there, and we don't want that. Okay, and then we just kind of smooth in any excess glue. And now we're going to let this whole thing dry. While the glue on the motor mount is drying, we can turn our attention to the fins. Now, if your fins are still in the fin stock, as they should be, we're going to start by just sanding the entire faces here. Now, sometimes they get popped out, in which case you can just do the same thing to each fin. Either way works fine. I'm going to start with some 100 grit sandpaper and just give it a very light sanding with this. This is just going to knock down anything that's relatively large and sticking out. And do both sides. Alright, and then once you've got that, you can go ahead and move to a finer grit. So now I'm going to use 150, and I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive with this one to give a nice fine finish. Alright, now once you've got it to this point, go ahead and take your hobby knife and cut these out. So there should just be some little tiny nubs in here that are left over. And just find those and cut your way through. Now this is fairly thick balsa, so you might find that you'll have to cut from both sides if they're not coming off very easily here. So this should pop right out. I missed one here. Okay. And we'll just do this to all of them. Okay, so you got 4 fins there. We also have a considerable amount of balsa here, and I've really gotten into the habit of saving stuff like this, and I can use it to make fins for other models. Now you can go ahead and stack these together so that they all line up here. Now they are similar, so make sure that you do get them lined up correctly. This is the leading edge. It's the one that's parallel with the grain, so this is going to be forward. So on the rocket, this is going to be the forward edge. This is the root edge here. This is what we're going to glue onto the rocket. All right, and then we have the 2 trailing edges down here. Technically, this is a tip edge, even though this looks like the tip. So what I'm going to do here is just take a piece of sandpaper. Either 100 or 150 grit works well for this. And I'm just going to put it on my work table here, and then I'm going to drag the edges across this a couple of times. And this will just remove those nubbins that we cut off there, as well as a lot of the soot from the laser cutter. And I'm just going to turn these around and do this to each set of edges. Okay, you don't need to get all the way through the soot or anything like that. And you need to try and keep the pressure as even as possible, so that we don't end up making one fin smaller than the other or something like that. Okay, so all of those have been done. Now the instructions recommend rounding over the leading edges here. The other ones they recommend just leaving square. This model is not going to be setting altitude records of any kind. So the trade-off of strength versus streamlining just isn't worth it. It's better to have good solid fins that are going to resist cracking. Okay, so to round these over, here you can use, again, either 100 or 150 grit sandpaper to start with. Again, this is our leading edge here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of knock down the edge corners themselves. Okay, so I'm just taking those corners and making them flatter. And then as we continue this, I'm changing the angle of my wrist and the fin slightly to make them start to round over. And then once I get that started initially, then I can just do this, where I'm rotating my wrist, or I can rotate the fin and keep my sandpaper steady. I tend to do both depending on which side I'm on. Alright, so we're going to flip that around. Alright, and I'm using a 100 grit for this part. But once I get to the point where it's mostly rounded over, but maybe I've got a little flat stuff here, then I switch over to 150 grit, so I'm not taking away as much. And I'm also checking the cross section here from both edges to make sure I keep it uniform and bilaterally symmetrical. All right, I'm off a little bit there. So here I'm going to go to 150 grit. Okay, not quite symmetrical, but close. Looks like we need a little more here. That's looking pretty good. Just a little more touch up there. Okay, now I'm going to go off camera and do the other three fins. Something to consider at this point is whether or not you want to add a sanding sealer to this. I am not going to do that today. I do have lots of other rocketry videos that include sanding sealing the fins here, and if you want to check one of those out, you can. What I am going to do is go ahead and do this without the sanding sealer, but when I get to the priming stage, I'm going to use a sandable filling primer that will also help fill in some of the grain here. Okay, and this rocket will fly just fine if you don't do any of that. Okay, you might notice that you'll have the grain coming through the paint job, and a lot of people don't even care about that. Frankly, I don't either, unless I'm trying to get this thing to go higher. Here I have all of my fins sanded, and as we move around here, they're mostly uniform. Something to watch for, one of these was significantly softer than the other. I think it was this one here. So when I started sanding on it, it actually carved in quite a bit more than I was expecting. I had to do a little bit of additional sanding to bring it back into shape, but it came out okay. The other thing we can do is mark the body tube here. And so that's what they're having us do right here in the next part of the instructions. Now, be careful though, because, alright, this is our fin marking guide, and if we cut this out, it's going to cut into the part of the instructions that go over the attachment of the fins. Okay, so for this, I'm going to just make note of it, alright, because I know what's going to go on here. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. But if you want to keep your instructions intact, then go ahead and make a photocopy of this and cut that out instead. Now once we're done marking this, don't throw it away because it also has our shock cord mount built into it. so when we wrap this around, this is going to be a fin line, a fin line, a fin line, and a fin line. Okay, and then if we go back to our instructions that we just cut up, we are also going to have to make a launch lug line that'll be in between the two. And in our case, that launch lug line is going to be right there where the two edges are going to come together there. So that's that LL. Okay, so we're going to take our body tube here, and just like I did with the motor mount, I'm going to mark one end as aft so that I don't get this confused later on. We're going to want a little bit of masking tape handy. Okay, and so we're going to wrap this around the aft end of the rocket here. Right, get that as tight as you can. If you've got a little bit of gap there, that's not a big deal. You just want to make sure that it's aligned, so those tick marks should be lining up. Okay, and then I'm going to attach this tape here so it doesn't come apart. And then I also like to take another piece of tape, a small one, and just use that somewhere on here. And this is going to keep our the fin guide from turning and making a mess of our marks. All right, once you've got that, then you're just going to go ahead and make a little tick mark at each of those arrows for the fins. Just like this. Okay, and then one for our launch lug, and I'm going to put a little LL down here so I know which one that is. Okay, now again, we want to hang on to this piece of paper so that we can use it for the shock cord mount a little bit later. Okay, now we do want to make another check here. Alright, so they recommend making lines 4 inches long for the fins, or excuse me, well, yeah, it's 4 inches to the launch lug. The fins, we may want to extend as well. So our fins are going to fit on like this. Alright, so we're going to want our lines here for our fins to be at least as long as the root edge. Okay, so if I take out my handy dandy ruler here, alright, these are 9.5 centimeters long, so just extend them a little bit beyond that. And as I said, the launch lug is shown here at 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And so I would make that even longer. In fact, I usually make my launch lug line most of the way up the rocket just because it gives me something to line up with. Now the instructions recommend using a door frame or a drawer edge to make these lines. I have this handy thing that Estes makes. This is a line guide, and it's basically a whole bunch of straight edges. Okay, so here I'm going to start with my launch lug line there. So that's my LL. Okay, and here I just line that up, and I'm just going to make a line about halfway the length of the body tube there. Okay, and then for my fin lines, I can make these at about 10 centimeters or 4 inches or so. Now I'm going to make a couple other measurements. Okay, so digging out the launch lug, this is about 6 centimeters long, right, which means if we come over here to the American scale, about 2.5 inches. All right, so it's supposed to go 10 centimeters or about 4 inches from the aft end. So if I mark that, here, this is my launch lug line. So one end of my launch lug is going to go here at 10 centimeters or 100 millimeters. Alright, and then I'm going to make another mark at 60 beyond that. Or excuse me, did I say 60? Yeah, 60. Goes there. Okay, so my launch lug is going to fit roughly in between those two lines, and that's fine. And then I'm also going to go ahead and use the English scale for the fins here, since that's what they're in. Alright, so my fins, well, you can use either. It's not an even inch number either. Alright, so my fins were 9.5 centimeters. So I'm just going to measure that here. Alright, so 9.5 will be there. And just do this for all of the fin lines. Now this is optional, and you'll see here the reason I'm doing this will be to help make the fins have stronger joints with the body tube once we get to gluing them on. Okay, now what I'm going to do is take my sandpaper, and just about any sandpaper will do. So I'm just going to use the same 150 grit I've been using for most of the stuff here. And now I'm going to sand my lines along the length where the fins are going to go. You don't need to do a lot, just like that. I'm just scratching the glossy surface. And what this is going to do is give a better surface for the glue to adhere to. So do this for all of the fin lines. And then also do it for the launch lug here. So in between those two marks. And I say, you don't need to make a whole bunch of sanding here. You're just scratching that glossy surface. Okay, now, by now, we're going to check on the motor mount, and when it's dry, we'll go on and mount it inside the body tube. I am ready to put the motor mount into the body tube here. Alright, and what they're showing is to put some glue about 5 centimeters or 2 inches up into the body tube, and that's what is going to come in contact with the forward centering ring, and that's good. And then they have us pushing this all the way in and then putting in a ring of glue around the aft end. Alright, I'm going to show you a little bit different way to do that. You can do it that way if you like. Okay, so we're going to start out in the same manner. I'm going to take, this is basically an elongated Q-tip. You can actually use a regular Q-tip if you don't have one of these. Okay, and I am going to take my glue. And I'm going to measure now 5 centimeters or 2 inches on my applicator here. I'm going to put my thumbnail right there. And now I'm going to get the tip of this loaded with glue. Okay, and now I'm going to put my applicator into my thumb hits, and then I'm going to bring it up against the inside wall there. And just put that all the way around inside. I'm going to take a look in there and make sure that I do have an even ring. Looks pretty good there. Okay, so now I'm going to put this in, but I'm not going to shove it up all the way into that ring of glue yet. I'm just going to get it far enough that it'll hang there. And now I'm going to put another ring of glue just inside this. Okay, now something I didn't do ahead of time, which I'm fortunate that I don't need to, do make sure that you dry fit this in before you apply the glue. Because if it hangs up, you're kind of out of luck at that point. If it's not going in easily, then sand around these edges here. Alright, now I'm also going to line up my engine clip with the launch lug line there. Okay, and now I can push this in, and we want this to be flush with the body tube like that. Okay, but now I've got both rings going through their own band of glue there. And then if you want, you can go ahead and add a fillet here anyway. So go ahead and take your applicator and fill in around that. Now do be careful that you don't get glue on the clip. Alright, and then if you want, you can take a clean applicator here and wipe off the excess. Alright, and if you got a lot of excess there, you can continue wiping that around and just making it a thin film, and that'll help protect this inner surface from hot exhaust gases and such. Okay, so we look like that at the end. Alright, I'm going to let this dry for a few minutes and then we'll start attaching fins. This next part requires the most patience. Everybody wants to get the fins on as soon as they can, and it just takes time to let these things dry in between application. So I'm going to start with one fin here, and I'm going to apply a relatively shallow but even bead of glue here. And this is a place where beginners make the mistake of thinking that more glue is better. We do want enough glue, but what's best to have is just this thin, even film that will dry quickly. Now once I've got it on there, I'm going to go ahead and wipe this off my fingers. It's a good idea to have some tissues or paper towels or a rag handy. Okay, I'm just going to pick a fin, doesn't matter which one you start with. Alright, now that corner there should line up flush with the edge of the tube. And we're going to put this right along our line. And I'm going to pop this back off. So now I've got a thin film on each edge. And I'm going to let this dry for about 30 seconds and then put it back on. 30 seconds have passed, and in that time the glue has gotten tacky. And this is going to allow me now to attach this again, put a little pressure on it, and it's going to hold there. Okay, so now I'm going to sight down the tube, make sure that I am in line with my lines, and also that my fin is perpendicular to the body tube. We can move it a little bit if we need to. We also want to make sure it's going straight down. Okay, and if everything is the way it should be, now we're just going to let this dry for about 15 minutes. Now, usually if you've done this right and the glue has become tacky, you can go ahead and put this on its end to dry, and that'll allow you to do each of the other fins as well. I just can't get it up underneath the camera because it's too long. What I'm going to do now is wait for a good 15 minutes, like I said, and then repeat this process for each of the fins. All right? And do make sure that you let them dry. Now, I do recommend that the next fin you do is the one opposite of this, so that you start out with good lined up fins, and then you can do the ones at 90 degrees to them. Okay? So I'm going to do that, and I will come back when all the glue is dry. While the glue is drying on my fins, I'm going to turn my attention to the nose cone here. Now this step is optional, but if you look closely at the nose cone, it's made in two halves, and there's definitely a seam line that bifurcates this. And you can ignore this, and at a distance you'll never see it anyway. But if you want something that's a little bit smoother, you can take some very fine sandpaper. At the coarsest you want to use is 220. I like to use about a 320 grit here. Okay, and we can start right at that seam. Now this has got some paint or something on it from a previous project. That's okay. It won't hurt anything because it's going to sand off here in a minute. Alright, and that's knocked down the seam there, and it's also given the surface a very fine, it's going to sound oxymoronic, a fine roughness to it. Okay, so it's not as smooth as it once was from the mold. It's got some texture, but it's just enough to make paint hold better. So once you paint this, you won't see that you've sanded it. So then we can go all the way around with this. in the same manner. So we don't have to do it as hard as we did on the seams because we're not trying to knock something down. We're just making a uniform surface for the paint to adhere. Now this is wet dry sandpaper, and so you can wet sand this. If you haven't done that, just hold this under a low running stream of water, and this sandpaper is meant to be wet, and so you can sand it while it's wet, and that gives you an even smoother surface, which is how I'm going to finish this. So you could just do it like this, wipe off the dust and go with that. I'm going to do a little wet sanding, which is hard to do under the camera here, but then I'll come back. Here's the nose cone after wet sanding, and you can see there's no gloss to it anymore because we've knocked that off. But the wet sanding also kind of cleans out the stuff as we sand it away. So you can still see a little tiny bit of the seam there, and if you need to, you can keep sanding at that. In extreme cases, like if you have a really deep seam and sanding will actually open up the nose cone, you can use something like this. This is a plastic model contour putty. And this can be worked into low spots and then sanded off to give an even finish as well. Alright, mine really doesn't need it, so I'm not going to use it this time. Now at this time, if you plan on painting the nose cone a different color than the rest of your rocket, this would be a good time to prime it and paint it. I just started painting my nose cone, and my fins are still gluing, so one of the other things we can do in the meantime is assemble the parachute. Now, there are two ways to do this. There's my way and the instructions. Now, in the instructions, they tie this directly to the nose cone, and that's fine. But it does make it hard to change the parachute if you have an accident where the parachute gets melted or torn or something like that. And it also means you pretty much have to store the parachute in the rocket all the time. And again, depending on your personal preferences, that may be fine. What I prefer to do is to use a snap swivel like you would use for fishing here. And this allows us to do two things. One is it makes the parachute removable, so instead of tying it permanently to the nose cone, we tie it onto a snap swivel, and it can use the snap part here to attach and detach. And having the swivel on there also helps at least a little bit to help keep the parachute from tangling up as it's coming down. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is just open this up and find all the shroud lines. And there should be one that goes down the middle here, it's this one here, and then two that are attached to the sides like this. And so I'm just going to gather all of these on one finger here, kind of like a hook. And then I'm going to hold the middle of the parachute in my other hand. And now I'm going to pull all of this taut. So I've got lines on this hand and the parachute on this. And down here in the middle, all of the corners should line up. Now if they don't, you can kind of move things around by changing the position here that you're holding the parachute, or changing the relative lengths of the lines by moving those back and forth. All right. Once you've got those where they're reasonably aligned, they may not need to be perfect. Alright, then I'm going to come down here, and I'm always going to hold on to the lines at this point so that they don't change relative length to each other. So I'm always holding them in one finger or in another finger here. And I'm going to kind of squish these down to a point, and I'm going to pass those through the eyelet of the swivel side of my snap swivel. Now you can get these snap swivels at just about any place that sells fishing gear. I get mine at my local department store. It starts with a W that will not be named. Okay, and then with this hanging here, I'm going to take the entire swivel and pass it through my loops. Pull the loops downward here like this. Now I'm holding onto the snap swivel, and now I'm just going to pull this tight. Okay, so that should form a nice knot at the end of my snap swivel. I'm going to come back and make sure that nothing has moved significantly. If it has, you can just loosen this up and try again. Alright, but that all looks good to me. So once you have it where you want it, then go ahead and take your white glue or wood glue again. And you're just going to put a little tiny dab of glue right on that knot. Doesn't take much at all. I'm just going to work that in there. and then let that dry. And once it's dry, then you can simply open this up and attach it to the nose cone. Okay? And so a lot of Rocketeers like to store their chutes outside of the rocket so they don't get permanently crinkled up. Some think that they get better opening that way. Or sometimes you may want to use a smaller chute. So if you have a particularly windy day and this is just looking way too big, this is an 18-inch parachute, I think, you might want to change it out for a 15-inch and give you a little bit quicker descent time. Okay, we're almost to the point where the fins are dry and we can add the launch lug, and we'll do that coming up. The glue on my fins is dry, but we still have to be careful at this point because we did start with a fairly thin film of glue, and so these are not at their peak strength yet. All right, but I think I did a pretty good job of keeping them symmetrical there. And now we're going to add the launch lug. And we're going to do this in kind of the same way that we did the fins, although you really don't need to wait and let it get tacky. I do still recommend that you use a relatively fine bead of glue. Okay, so it's kind of discontinuous there. I'm going to run it all together. And again, mainly because if you use a lot of glue, it just takes longer to dry. And we're going to add fillets to reinforce this anyway, so there's really no use in putting a whole lot of glue on there. All right, now I'm going to put this in the sanded spot between my two lines there. Okay, and I'm going to sight down the rocket, and this is why I put that extended line on there, is this gives me something to sight down and line up with. Okay, so if I look down on it, it should be centered on the line. As I look along its length, and I can't do this, let me try this from the other direction, that's better. Okay, so here I can sight down that line and down the length of the rocket, and the body tube, the line, and the launch lug should all be parallel to each other and in line, and it is. So now I'm going to let this dry as well, and when we come back, we'll put on the fillets for everything. The glue on my fins and launch lug is dry, and so we're ready to put the fillets on. We're going to have a lot of excess glue, so it's a good idea to have some paper towels or a rag or something to wipe your fingers on. Alright, and we're going to start here with the launch lug. I'm just going to run a bead of glue down each side of it. Alright, and then we'll just take a finger, smooth that in, and remove the excess. And I got that kind of around the end there. I didn't want it, so we'll just move that around too. Okay, and then you can kind of quickly smooth that in where you need to. Now, especially if you're using wood glue, this is going to get tacky really quick, so if you need to do something, do it quickly. White glue does give you a little more working time, but it also tends to make bubbles more. Okay, now for this part, clean off the tip a little bit there. For this part, I like to do facing fins at a time, so I'm going to do this fin and this fin. All right, and smooth those in. Now, as long as you keep the rocket horizontal, you can just turn this and go on and do all of the fins at the same time. Now, if you want to have more built-up fillets so that the surfaces kind of blend into each other more, you can do that, but it's best to do it in layers. So don't try and make a really heavy glue fillet because invariably it's going to creep in one direction or another. Instead, you can either make multiple glue fillets and just do them one after another after each one's dried, or you can also use the plastic model contour putty I showed before, and those can build up. Now this builds up nicely, but it's not strong. So always start with some glue fillets for strength, and then you can use this. You can also use wood filler to build up your fillets as well. But like the model contour putty, wood filler also doesn't have the strength. So always make sure you start with glue fillets, and then you can use some of these other materials to build those up if you so desire. Right now I'm going to leave this to dry in a horizontal position here so that my fillets don't run toward one end or another. And once those are dry, we'll go ahead and install the shock cord. My fillets have dried, and we'll just do a quick inspection here. So the fins all look pretty good. Okay, don't see any bubbles there. Now, the launch lug, you can see it has some bubbles in it, and for some reason, launch lugs just happen to do this. I think it has to do with the curvature there. You've got a few options here. You can ignore it because the strength is still there. It just may not look as pretty. You can try another layer of glue, or you can use a putty type of filler here. So you can use either a wood filler on this and just smooth that in, or you can use this plastic contour putty here, which is what I'm going to use. This has an alcohol base to it, and so it dries fairly quickly. You can just put in a bead on each side, and you work this just like you would a glue fillet. So just have a couple of tissues or paper towels handy here, and you just smooth this in. Now it starts to dry almost right away, so it'll get crumbly, so you need to work fairly quickly here. Alright, and then once this is dry, it sands very readily, and so even though it looks kind of chunky here, that'll sand off really quickly once it dries up. And usually it takes anywhere between 30 to 60 minutes to dry enough to sand it. Okay, now we can go ahead and continue working on this while that dries. You can also use this on the fins if you want to build up the fin fillets. I'm not going to worry about doing that. What we can do while that's drying is cut out our shock cord mount here from our now not needed fin guide. Alright, now traditionally the way the instructions have us do it is simply put the shock cord in the middle, glue that down, and then fold this over itself. The way I've always done it for a long time is I would put it on at an angle here so that when we fold this over, the cord lies beside itself instead of over itself, and that makes it a little more flat. One of my viewers gave me another idea, which I really like, and that is to take the end of the shock cord here and cut it in half lengthwise, pretty much for the length of the section 2 here. Alright, and when we glue it on, we're going to glue it splayed out like this. And then when we fold it up, the two splayed parts go on either side of the main part of the shock cord there. Okay, so we're going to do that. And then just take white glue or wood glue. And here we can be fairly generous with it. Okay, so just lay out a fairly good bead there. I'm going to spread mine out a bit. Here. Again, it's a good idea to have something to wipe your fingers on. Okay, so I'm going to splay this apart like that, and then fold my section 1 up into it. And the idea here is to get a sandwich of glue and paper with very little air in that. Okay, and I'm going to bring this up onto the 3. Alright, and I can feel the splayed pieces are out next to, or on either side of the shock cord there. Okay, I'm going to make a kind of a bow to this to help it fit down better. Alright, and then we're going to take some more glue here, smear that all over. You may need to add to it, because in the same way we want to try and eliminate air pockets and bubbles from this, so it's just going to be layers of glue and paper and cardboard. Okay, and now we're going to take this whole thing and put the glue side facing down. I don't want to press it in quite yet. I'm going to move this down inside the tube, and this needs to go down as far as you can make it, at least about 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches. Farther if you can. The farther down it is, the less likely it's going to interfere with your nose cone. Alright, and then I'm going to use my fingers here to press that against my hand and the body tube and get all the air bubbles out and get the mount as flat as we possibly can. And if you have long fingers, this works even better. If you don't have long fingers, you can also use a dowel. What I've got here is an old motor stuck onto a dowel, and you can use that to kind of roll in there and press that down. Alright, now if we can look down there, you can see the shock cord mount down as far as I can get it with my stubby fingers. Alright, but that's far enough. And now we're just going to let that dry once more. And so the shock cord mount and fillets can continue drying. And when we come back, we're going to be ready to prime and paint this. Here I've sanded off the excess modeling putty here. And that's ready to go. And so I'm going to get this ready for paint. I'm going to go ahead and tuck the shock cord down. I have not attached it to the nose cone yet. The nose cone is actually in the process of being painted right now. So I'm just going to stuff that down there, and then I'm just going to put in some tissues here to keep that from falling out and also to protect it from the paint. The first thing I'll do is give this a couple of coats of a filling sandable primer. And this is made by both Krylon and Rust-Oleum. I don't know if any of the other more hobby-oriented paints make one. A lot of times you have to look in the automotive section for it though. But the nice thing about it is that it fills in the grain here, and it also dries in about 15 minutes, so you can overcoat it very quickly, and then once you've got it where you want, you can sand it down, remove the excess on top, and it's going to leave the filled areas of the grain intact there. And some people like to use it all over and even try and fill in the spirals and such. I'm not quite that concerned about it. But it's really hard to show it with the camera here. So I'm going to go ahead and go give this a couple of coats of primer, and then I'll let you see what it looks like after that. The main body of the model rocket is being primered right now. It's drying. This is the nose cone that I started earlier, and so this has already had several coats of what's called strawberry red paint. And then this will go probably with a yellow color that I'm going to do the main body in. And that's kind of close to what the illustration on the packaging shows, although it has a black nose cone. I'm going to go with a general yellow color scheme for the main part of that. So here's the main part of the rocket after 2 coats of the filling sandable primer here. And one of the things you can notice here, let me see if I bring this up close, is that it really highlights the fibers and particles of wood from the balsa fins there. And if nothing else, using the primer like this, and it doesn't even have to be this primer, but using any primer highlights those fibers and also kind of locks them in place. so that after the primer is dry, I can go through with some 320 or even 400 grit sandpaper and sand down that, and then when I put additional coats of primer and or paint on this, it's going to have a smoother finish. Okay, it's already starting to fill in much of the grain there. And if you use a lot of this stuff, in fact you can kind of see it here, it'll fill in most of the grain, especially after you sand it and refill it a couple of times. Okay, out on the rest of the body, this also kind of highlights areas that might need a little bit of sanding. Alright, right now you can still see the spirals, and like I said, it doesn't really matter that much to me if they're there or not. Usually by the time I've given this a couple more coats of primer and a few coats of paint, those go away as well. Okay, so this needs to dry a little while, and then I will sand this and continue priming it, and I'll come back once I put the paint on. Here I have the main body of the rocket painted. This has had 2 coats of primer and 3 coats of paint on top of that, and now it just needs to dry before we can do the final assembly. The paint on my rocket is dry, and now we're ready to attach the nose cone here. And the first thing I need to do is take out this little bit of flash. Be careful that you don't cut through the actual loop there. Okay, and then we're going to retrieve our shock cord from inside here. Okay, and just tie a double knot onto the nose cone eyelet. That. Okay, pull this from all directions there. Okay, and then I'm going to cut this back to about 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch there, just so it's less likely to get caught between the body tube and the nose cone shoulder. And then we can take just a little dab of glue here, white glue or wood glue. And we're just going to put that right on the knot. Oop, that's actually way too much. Okay, we just want a little bit there, just enough to lock that knot in place. Okay, I'm going to set that aside to dry for a few minutes. Now that the glue is dry, we can go ahead and attach the parachute. Okay, now remember we pre-assembled this. If you have gone without the snap swivel though, this is the time to attach the parachute. So in this case, you would simply pass the shroud lines through the loop in the nose cone, pull those loops through, and then put the entire parachute through those loops and pull them tight, just like it's shown in the instructions. Okay, the advantage of this is now I can just clip this on whenever I need it. I can just go on, oop, get off the rubber there, there we go. Alright, so that can just clip onto here. Okay, and then that's ready to go. You can fold up your parachute in whichever style that you prefer. Okay, I like to go up like this, and then fold the shroud lines inside, kind of making a wedge there. Okay, and for now I'm just going to store this inside the rocket so that it's out of the way while we put the decals on. I'm ready to do the decals now. We've got the whole rocket assembled, though it really likes to attract dust at this point. Okay, so if we go by the packaging here, and you don't have to, okay, so you can put this together however you want. You can omit the decals completely if you like. But we're going to have one of the 2 stripe wraps close to the nose, the other one down here close to the fins. Now notice I did not do odd colored fins on here, I just made it all one color. Okay, and then the big Bertha logo can go somewhere along the body. Now I am going to do that opposite my launch lug so that when it's sitting on the pad you can see it there. Okay, so here I'm just going to cut these out. I've got a small basin of water here that's ready to go. It's just room temperature water. Alright, I'm just going to place this in the water and let that fully saturate. Now I'm going to do mine a little bit different. I'm going to place the big Bertha more toward the aft end here and center it between the fins. Oh, that one's starting to lift already, so we must be ready to go. Okay, give that a little shifting here. There we go. So now I'm just going to let it come right off the edge like that. Okay, now I don't want it completely at the aft end, but close. So I'm going to hold on to it there and just take the backing out from underneath it. Just like that. Now let's see how well that got centered. Pretty good. Alright, so if it's where you want it, then we just gently squeegee it out here with the tissue. Oops, don't be moving on me there. Alright, next I'm going to put one of the stripes up near the nose cone. So go ahead and put that in the basin. There we go, just starting to loosen there. Okay, so I'm going to leave myself about the same size gap as the stripes are there. Slowly bring this around. Okay, not quite where I wanted it. We can shift things a little there. Let's see how that looks. That looks pretty good. Alright, and then once again we'll just squeegee off the excess. Like so. Okay. My strawberry red actually matches this kind of orangish red here really well. Of course I planned it that way. Okay, and then for our final stripe, I'm going to place it right above the launch lug. Now here I'm going to run it from the other side, just because I want to have the black facing aft. I'm going to make it so the seams join back here. Alright, so if all works as planned, bit off there. We can try to reposition that. This one is not wanting to reposition as well. Let's get a little more water here. We'll go with that. Got a little bump in there, but I'm afraid if I try and do anything more, it's going to tear. Or do something like that. Okay. And if you like, you can clear coat this. I would wait 48 hours before doing so. Alright, but from nose to stern here, that's my big Bertha. Hope you had a great time building this with me. Have a great launch and a safe recovery. And please stay tuned for more of my videos.